Hi, it's BioGea, and this is about evolution and the simplicity of its mechanism of action. Evolution is a fact, just a brief summary of the evidence we have. Fossils. They are proof that living beings in the past were different from current living beings. Dinosaurs and trilobites no longer exist. Species change, evolve. Organs that don't perform the same function and yet share an internal common structure. Why do cats and humans share the same set of bones arranged in the same way when our arms and their legs perform different functions? Because this arrangement is the one that we both have inherited from our common ancestor. There are organs that don't fulfill a function in the species. Why do whales have non-functional hips and glass lizards non-functional limbs? Because those organs were functional in their ancestors. Embryos of different species look similar. Let's see you discover which one is the human embryo. They are alike. Those similarities make sense as they reveal evolution from a common ancestor. Had you guessed it? If you look at any living being under the microscope, you'll see cells, whether they are animals, plants, fungi, or bacteria. It's extremely unlikely that independently originated life forms share the same basic structure. All living beings made of cells is a proof of a common ancestor. The same principle could be applied to biomolecules. You know that a document that is written in one type of computer language may be unreadable on another. In contrast, all living beings can read the information of other organisms, because all of us store information in the same language, the language of DNA. Nowadays, it's possible to take a fragment of DNA from a human cell, a gene, insert it into a bacterium, multiply the bacterium to give rise a colony of bacteria with a human gene, and induce it to read the gene. In fact, this is the way human insulin is produced. This won't be possible unless all living beings descend from a common ancestor with the same DNA language. Biomolecules also help us to determine which organisms in a group are most closely related, analyzing how different their DNAs or proteins are. Humans and chimps share more percentage of their DNA than humans and dandelions, because we share a most recent common ancestor with other animals than with plants. Now I'm going to explain in the simplest way how evolution works. I'll do it with the infamous example of antibiotic resistance. Imagine that a diverse bacterial population, several bacteria with different DNAs, infects you. Remember, DNA is the molecule that contains the information necessary to build an organism. To overcome the infection, you must take antibiotics for a week. Antibiotics will kill first the least resistant bacteria. Natural selection adds eliminating living beings with DNAs that make them unable to survive. In contrast, bacteria with DNAs that give them resistant to the antibiotic will survive. By living longer, they have more opportunities to reproduce and pass their DNA to the next generations. More opportunities to transmit DNA through inheritance. And keep in mind that during reproduction, more variability will be introduced. New combination of DNA will appear again. As you continue taking antibiotics, some of the bacteria that had resisted until now die. But 4 days pass, you have less bacteria, and as you feel better, you stop taking the antibiotic. Not good. If there were any bacteria left in your body, these would be the most resistant ones. the ones that will transmit the DNA information to withstand the antibiotic to their offspring that may kill a human being. One population of bacteria started and now there is another. The repetition of this pattern over and over again has ended up giving rise to bacteria resistant to antibiotics. All of this is because bacteria have evolved. Now we'll describe all these processes in detail. First, variability. No doubt, DNA diversity is essential in evolution. So the question is, what's the origin of this variability? We'll start with the origin of variability in bacteria. To be more precise, both in bacteria and archaea. But to simplify, we'll talk only about bacteria. Bacteria are made of prokaryotic cells, simple cells that reproduce asexually, what means that their offsprings are clones of themselves. Mother and daughter bacterial cells have identical DNA. Sure? 100% identical? No, not 100%, mainly because of two reasons. To reproduce asexually, the mother bacterium has to copy its DNA to distribute it among the two daughters. Now think about copying a book that contains millions of letters. Will you make a mistake? I do it, and more than one, for sure. Bacteria have to copy a DNA made of millions of units. In doing so, they make very few mistakes, but they do. Those mistakes are called mutations. In this example, after DNA duplication, two sections with mistakes appear in green. So, even during asexual reproduction, the resultant offspring have different DNAs. There is another way of introducing variability. Bacteria share their DNA by literally giving them to one another, regardless of the species. The process in which the sharing of DNA is between organisms that are not parent offspring is called horizontal gene transfer. Bacteria do that in different ways. When a bacterium dies and disintegrates, their DNA is released, and it's possible that another bacterium took up this DNA. Viruses that infect bacteria by accident may move short pieces of bacterial chromosomal DNA from one bacterium to another. Some bacteria have plasmids, short pieces of extra DNA. These plasmids can be transferred among bacteria using a tube-like structure, like the one seen in the image. We've already explained how prokaryotic living beings generate DNA diversity, and now we'll describe how we, eukaryotic living beings, do. We are still dependent on mutations, and although horizontal gene transfer exists, it's not widespread. However, we have something new, something that provides both variability and pleasure: sex. All eukaryotes, well, 99.99%, reproduce sexually. The main sources of DNA variation arising from sexual reproduction are: although it's not completely true, we assume that any member of a species can reproduce with any other member of the same species at different gender. So, there are many possible DNA parent combinations. In almost all eukaryotic cells, DNA molecules appear in pairs, one from our father and the other from our mother. In order to reproduce, we produce female and male gametes. These gametes have only one DNA molecule of each pair to ensure that the offspring, the one that result from the fusion of the two gametes, have the same number of molecules in each generation. But the process is far more complicated. It's not the molecule from the mother or the father the one that is selected for the gamete. During gamete formation, the two molecules of each pair line up, exchange part of themselves, forming a new molecule of DNA. A new combination result, and with them the possibility of creating endless combination of gametes. If two parents were allowed to have 1 million babies, all of them would be genetically different. Next topics: natural selection and inheritance. Nature is wise is a common saying. Living beings are really well designed. Two examples. Airplanes have body shapes similar to those of birds, shapes suitable for flying. Solar power plants have an optimal arrangement of solar panels, the same that sits in a sunflower. This could lead one to think that in the same way that we have created airplanes and solar plants, someone or something would have created birds and sunflowers. The answer is no. There is no evidence that living beings intentionally design themselves, nor that other entity does so. Nature is not wise, but acts as if it were. We'll see how with a classical example. The case of the pepper moth, Bison betularia, a moth that perches on trees which happen to have light-colored trunks. As with all species, every season more moths are born that can survive in its environment. Competition over resources is established. Pepper moths with DNA that make them to be dark stand out on the light trunks. Predators see and eat them. They are eliminated by natural selection. In contrast, moths that were born with DNAs that make them lighter, blending it with the light-colored trees, survive predators and reproduce. They are selected by natural selection. The new generation inherits DNAs that code for light color. The moth population was made up of light moths, not because the dark ones didn't appear, but because when they appeared, they were eliminated and with them their DNA. All this changed with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution. As the trees darkened with soot released by burning coal, the light-colored moths were easier to see. They were eaten by predators more and more. Meanwhile, when dark-colored moths appeared, as they blended in better on the darker trees, they survived and had more opportunities to reproduce. They passed their DNA with that color info onto their offspring. Over time, the dark-colored moths became the more common of the two color forms. Nature can generate an infinite number of different individuals, variability, and those that are well adapted to that environment survive and reproduce. It seems that nature is wise because it ends up generating good designs. But this success is not the result of a purpose, it's not intentional. It's just the result of variability, selection, and inheritance. Repeat it over and over again. You may think that a change of color is something easy to get. It's just only one trait. But how does evolution explain great transformations? Transformations such as the transition from dog-like terrestrial animals to whales. This is Pachycetes, an ancestor of whales that lived on land 50 million years ago. As you can see, it could walk. It's included as an ancestor of whales because of a distinctive ear bone. 45 million years ago, Ambulocetes roamed the earth. Look at its limbs. They don't look like those of a great runner. They are better adapted to swimming, but they are still large and connected to the spinal column. Durdon lived 40 million years ago. The front limbs are perfectly adapted to swim. Meanwhile, the hind ones are vestigial, non-functional, not even connected to the spinal column. This is not a fossil, it's a current whale skeleton. Notice it has a limb arrangement similar to Durodon. The key to evolution success is time, is making the process of variability and selection repeat itself over a large number of generations. The example of whale evolution proves it. In 50 million years, a terrestrial mammal have evolved into one fully adapted to life in water. Summarizing everything with an algorithm, the algorithm of evolution. 1. We start from a population with a great variability of individuals, all of them unique, with DNAs different from those of the rest. This variability was obtained by mutations, horizontal gene transfer, and sexual reproduction. 2. Not all offspring that were born survive and reproduce because of a competition for resources. 3. Those who have DNAs that give them inadequate traits to survive in that environment die, and with them disappear their DNA. They have been eliminated by natural selection. 4. Those who have DNAs that give them adequate traits to survive in that environment reproduce, and their DNA is passed on to the next generation, is inherited. The new population has changed. Evolution has happened. 5. Return to square one and repeat it again. That's it. I hope you learned and enjoyed watching this video. Thanks.